Welcome to the webinar. Very happy to see you online. We've got an exciting talk coming up. We have a panel of presenters today who I will introduce shortly to you. So welcome everyone. I propose we start. Welcome to this monthly webinar on the value of water in Canada. My name is Roy Brouwer. I'm Executive Director of the Water Institute, organizing this monthly webinar. Before I introduce the speakers, I would like to acknowledge that I'm participating today from the traditional territory of the Neutral, Missanabie, and Ho-Tassone peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldeman tract that you can see here on the map. The land that was granted to the Six Nations and includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. And our active work within the Water Institute towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is centralized within the Indigenous Initiatives Office at the University of Waterloo. And I invite you to take a second to acknowledge from which traditional territory you are participating. A little bit of housekeeping rules. We'll have a presentation. I'll do the introduction of the speakers in a second. If you have any questions for the speakers, please enter your questions during the presentation in the Q&A box. And then we'll get to your questions at the end of the presentation. So please use the Q&A box, not the chat box. If you have any technical issues, use the chat box. Julie Grant, the communications officer of the Water Institute, is here with us as well. She's responsible for the production of this webinar series, and she can help you with any technical issues that you might have. So any questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So let me start by introducing the lead speaker for today, who is Elaine Ho-Tassone. She's a former colleague here at the University of Waterloo. She did her PhD here in social and ecological sustainability from the Collaborative Water Program, one of the largest and most interdisciplinary water graduate programs in Canada. She's passionate about building bridges between people and organizations, raising social ecological awareness, and exploring innovative, sustainable solutions for environmental health and community development. Elaine is the Director of Operations at the NORDIK Institute, a community-based research and development organization affiliated with Algoma University, and she is an adjunct professor in that university in the School of Life Sciences and the Environment. She's also a certified project management professional. She's a recognized water leader in the Algoma region. She was an appointee to the City of Sault Ste. Mary's, Canada's Water Agency Task Force, a role in which she led a series of community engagement discussions around the potential mandate and location for the agency. And as a result of this and other work, she was awarded 2 Algoma Visionary Awards in 2022, the Environment and Nature category and the category of Professional of the Year. And today, as you saw, she's going to be joined by colleagues Tess James Sullivan, Kiki Vetrie, and Ajaz Shaikh. Tess James Sullivan is Director of Lands and Resources of the Missanabie Cree First Nation. Kiki Vetrie is the Water Ranger at the NORDIK Institute, and Ajaz Shaikh is the NORDIK Institute Project Manager and Community Coordinator in a community-based water monitoring project that will be discussed today. So without further ado, I'm very happy to hand over to Elaine and her colleagues, and thank you all for joining.
Excellent. Thank you, Roy. And to the Water Institute as well for holding this speaker series. So I do want to start with an acknowledgement and an affirmation on behalf of the NORDIK Institute as well. So the NORDIK Institute works side by side with Indigenous people and the homelands of Batchewana First Nation, Garden River First Nation, Missanabie Cree First Nation, and also the Métis people. We recognize that the site on which our office is located is the site of the former Shingwak Indian Residential School. And so NORDIK Institute recognizes that there are intergenerational impacts that have resulted, and we commit to honoring this history for the survivors, their families, and for those who did not return home. As a result, in the work that we do, we actionably commit to building vibrant, strong, continued relations with the local nations of Bawating, also known as Sault Ste. Marie. And in the spirit of peace and friendship, we value our treaty relationship, the lands on which we reside, and the Indigenous communities everywhere while challenging the systems of oppression. So I will just give you a quick overview of what we are going to be looking at today. We are going to be starting with a bit of a more academic discussion on some of the approaches that we've taken to create knowledge and information around this question about what is the value of water. We'll hear from perspectives from some of the different projects that we are engaging with right now. We'll have a quick wrap up, and then hopefully we'll have lots of time for questions and answers. So just to kind of package that a little differently, we are going to be focusing on highlighting some of the engagement approaches that we take to learn about this this question of value. But we are going to be answering a little bit more of that value somewhat indirectly as we go through our presentation. Okay, so when we ask the question, what is the value of water? A lot of the time we need to backtrack a little bit and ask whose values are we talking about, because the way we evaluate things are based on our values. So in today's projects, and these are, I'm not going to go too far into these, but they are described on my website if anybody's interested in learning more. There will be perspectives from youth and families who live in the lower Grand River watershed near Lake Erie and near shore Lake Erie. So there's a few different communities down there that we undertook surveys with. There is a lot of content that was brought in from Indigenous youth from the Six Nations of the Grand River. This is through a sub-project of my PhD work that was called Grand Expressions, and the partnership was with an after-school youth group called Music for the Spirit and Indigenous Visual Arts. So yes, and then the manager of the lands and resources at Missanabie Cree, which will be Tess, who will be speaking on her own behalf. And then recent graduates, of course, in Sault Ste. Marie, one who is a domestic student, one who is international. So we'll have a few different perspectives from that front. They will introduce themselves later as well. That would be Kiki and Ajaz. So if you look at the kinds of perspectives that are coming into this presentation, you can see that we're speaking from a somewhat transdisciplinary point of view. We're not speaking from a specific industry like an economist or a scientist. We're kind of taking real life experiences from people. It's also an intercultural weaving that we're going to be demonstrating. So we can basically state that the importance of water infiltrates society in a variety of dimensions. And as a result, we've titled our presentation, Studying the Sacred, to recognize that sacred relationship that every single one of us has with water, and recognizing that water is life and encompasses all of life. So as mentioned, the value we place on things is often a result of our own values, which emerges from our relationships with those things. So in this case, of course, water. So in the work that I've done, and a lot of the work that we're continuing to do, we strive to define and characterize those relationships very consciously, and to do this first in a very local scale. This allows us to really get into a comprehensive understanding of what these relationships are, between whom, how these relationships are developed, and what it then results in terms of how people think about things, the decisions that we make, the actions that we take. So looking at economic ways of valuing water, which is often what people immediately think of when you talk about the value of water, right? Is we often think about economics. I know from this series that that's definitely not the only scope, but it's often the go-to. And so there are limitations from thinking that way in terms of defining the relationship as almost a one-way relationship, in terms of humans are often the beneficiaries, and environment is often the impacted thing of whatever we're doing. We're impacting it, and there's not much of a two-way or multi-directional conversation that is often taking place. So this approach to really characterize relationships locally first does not necessarily mean different steps have to be taken, although it may. But that we think about things and focus on different aspects of what we're already measuring or already talking about in different ways. So we want to make sure we're characterizing those relationships to allow that multi-directional approach that then allows us to really tease out some of the less easily definable aspects of this conversational value. So from that PhD work that Roy mentioned that I did at University of Waterloo, one of the things that we did was we did a survey with residents of the Lower Grand River and nearshore Lake Erie. So we had 133 people who reside or work in the community respond on various questions. So 2 of the questions are in blue at the bottom there. What do you care about and how do you interact with the water? And there were, I think, 12 questions that we asked. It was really interesting because the responses that we got were very rarely unsure. I'm unsure about whether my waters are healthy, for example. They were usually very confidently either the water is healthy, I have, we have a healthy environment, et cetera, or very much the opposite. So the scale was somewhat polarized in terms of what people in the community felt and thought about um, the health of the waters and how we should value our relationships and the water itself. So we found a lot of recreational components were top of mind of the way people interact with water, which probably isn't a surprise. But in addition to that, when we asked about the specific values in terms of how you interact with the environment, it wasn't focused entirely on that quote unquote use of the water system, but also on recognizing the intrinsic value of the functioning of the ecosystems and the biodiversity that exists there as well. So there was a recognition of the importance of safeguarding water resources for other beings, other purposes as well, not just human. And then after we looked at the very, very local, and this is a recommendation that we often have when we talk to folks about who, how do you embark on starting to learn about this, is after you look at the local perspective, then start to complement and align with regional and national governance perspectives. So we often, or conventionally, we often will start with what is the mandate here, and let's try to put in place methods and approaches that get us to where we need to be for those purposes. Yes, I recognize management priorities and things are pretty well always developed through consultations with communities. But in terms of the approach of how do we get to decision making around the certain mandates, we typically start with the mandate itself and then develop a methodology around that versus speaking with community members local scale first to say, okay, what do you need first? And then how does that then align with the mandates at the regional and higher levels? So essentially, one of the things that I've been a big proponent of is designing processes to reflect the actual diversity of the people you're interacting with. So the actual communities and community members that exist in the area that you are working within, what kind of needs exist there, okay? So when we're looking at the concept of inclusivity, that is often defined as bringing people into a space that already exists who weren't there before. We are now including those demographics. Often these spaces were not designed for those people to participate effectively or meaningfully. So it is often needed for us to consider, well, what are other spaces, and these can be physical or non-physical spaces, that allow different kinds of engagement to different levels, different perspectives to come in a way that is meaningful for those people. And what does that look like? How do we do that, right? And often that would require partnerships with the people you're trying to work with. You can't often design something for someone else if you don't understand the context that they're coming from. So as an example, in the work that we did, I say we, even because my PhD work was in a really fundamental partnership with several different groups, including the youth from 6 Nations of the Grand River that I mentioned earlier. One of the things that we did was we created a virtual art exhibit to bring forward their perspectives. So rather than go in and have meetings with the youth and interview them and have conversations and outright ask them, what is your relationship with water and how do you feel about this and what does this mean for you? Especially for youth, it is often really hard for people in general, but youth especially, to on the spot or in a matter of a couple of hours define that in their mind and communicate it in a way that is useful and reflective of how they actually feel, versus having, in this case, it was a several months long, about 6 months long engagement where youth were able to go and speak to their families and get teachings and paint the stories that they were receiving and take photographs of the places that they go and how they interact and bring it all together and start to tell a story of how they really are integrated with the water system and what values then are represented from that. We would not have gotten half of or more the information that we got out of them than we would have. So just two examples are on this screen here. One of them you can see on the right is the photograph. This was a fairly obvious example that we all expected to see. The Six Nations of the Grand River had, for a long period of time, challenges with clean drinking water being a reliable supply in the community. So, of course, the youth took photos to demonstrate the issue, right? So you can see the 6 jugs of water for the Six Nations, and one of the youth in front with the drum. And there's a whole meaning behind that. And in the art exhibit, they did tell stories and provide write-ups to accompany these series of artworks that they created to explain to people what it is that they were feeling and doing. But then there's the image on the right, the painting by Ashley. So this originally took me a little bit by surprise, although it makes complete sense to me now. But this is one of those things where potentially, if we had gone in and just spoken to the youth, we may not have gotten as candid of a response as we now received. So this painting ended up being part of a series because many of the youth decided that they felt strongly about including this, and it is related to the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So originally, being a settler, I'm thinking, what does that have to do with water, right? So this was a good learning experience for me. It was twofold. One being that in the community, a couple of the youth had shared an experience where there was a missing woman, and the youth themselves found her floating down the river. So their connection with the water, in part, was this experience where they said, okay, well, this, in a way, the river brought her home, but in what way, right? But at the same time, certain interactions around the water as well helped with a healing process around certain challenges that the youth also face. So it was a very multidimensional story in terms of the information we got out of it, but also extremely meaningful for the youth to be able to share those stories in the way that they did. And it went along with a lot of community activities. I don't really want to define it because I wasn't part of those activities, so I don't really feel comfortable speaking about them. But there were different conversations and teachings that happened around their production of these works with their families as well. So just an example of what some of these shared spaces might look like versus me sitting down at a table and chairs across from a youth and speaking to them. So several of these methods and approaches and the things that we learned from the work have been published in journal papers. And these are 2 examples here that I've just highlighted because they do highlight the actual methodological piece that you might be able to actually take lessons from to translate in other contexts. If there is interest in having more of a conversation about some of the things that we've done and how that might be applied in other contexts, I'm happy to have those conversations with people after. Roy has my email, and you can feel free to share that, Roy, with anyone. But for the time being, I will pass it on to Tess to move forward with some First Nation perspectives.
Now, Miigwech, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Great,
Yes.
okay. Miigwech, thank you for having me here today. I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself. I am the manager of the Lands and Resources for Missanabie Cree First Nation. However, my background, my ancestral ties are with Six Nations of Grand River, so interestingly enough, and down around Haldeman County. I have grandparents and great-grandparents that are buried. I just had the opportunity to visit them recently. And it was a very amazing experience for me to go to some of the grave sites that I have never been to, or those that I haven't been to in over 20 years in Haldeman County, and also have ancestral ties to the Mississauga of Credit. There was some intermarriage there, and so I have a great grandmother that's also of the Ojibwe descent. Meantime, I came north very early after my first undergraduate degree. And came north, and I've been north ever since. And the north really grabbed me, and it was in a spiritual way. And reading about the history and seeing how much there was movement between the gathering place of Bawating here in Sault Ste. Marie, which is where I'm also residing, with the people that are from Mississauga of Credit and the early days of the Methodist movement that came north, and with some of the early philosophies of residential schools coming from a much better vision before it was corrupted at that time, work between Chigwakansi and Peter Jones. It's interesting that I came north and that the North grabbed me along Lake Superior in such a way that it makes me think that it's a lot of blood memory. But that being said, I find myself years later, after working for the Ministry of Natural Resources for 17 years, I found my way to be able to lead the Lands and Resources Department for the Missanabie Cree people. So I wanted to talk a little bit, I guess we'll move the slide, about the Missanabie Cree. So the Missanabie Cree First Nation is a signatory of the Treaty 9. And it was much later, after Treaty 9 was signed, that they became signatories to the Treaty 9. And that's because they weren't recognized by the government as being a distinct people. They were thought to be the same community as from James Bay. And they did migrate down from James Bay and are ancestrally associated with those from James Bay, but they're a distinct community that came down along the waterway. So they do belong to the Amashkego, which is the people of the swamps. So the James Bay sort of coastal areas where there's a great deal of muskeg. And then, however, it's through the historic canoe route, which I'll talk about, where they settled later on. So, and I'll be speaking Cree here. Let's just go back a slide there. I wanted to be able to use the words in Cree. So Nipi or Nibi in Ojibwe is the term for water. And Pimatasindoene, it's a way of life, or it is life. So Missanabie Cree people and all Mushkego people, and I would dare to say most Indigenous people, have a real intrinsic esoteric relationship with the water that's difficult, I think, to define, but more a way of feeling. But we'll try to describe it in these slides. So if we move to the next slide, please. So you'll see James Bay, there's a historic canoe route that comes down from Moosonee along the Missanabie River down to Lake Superior. And there is a headwaters in between there. So there's halfway you have flowing north to the James Bay Arctic watershed. And then halfway down south, it becomes the Lake Superior watershed. And it's this historic fur trade canoe route. And even before the fur trade, we have some archaeological evidence that dates back even 9,000 years of this particular canoe or route being used, or the waterways being used during this time to access between both Arctic watershed and Lake Superior watershed. Next slide, please. So the Missanabie Cree settled around what is now known as Dog Lake. Historically, there's other names, Assiniboine and Mantagumi Lake. I have an arrow there to show where that's at. So if you follow down the Missanabie River, which is the river to the far west in this map, you'll see that it comes down to that juncture, which is Dog Lake. And just to the north of that area, there's an actual headwaters. And I don't think you'll see my arrow, but it's there's a portage, an ancient portage, which still exists today at Crooked Lake Narrows, they call it. So you have to go up and over a height of land, and then you come into the area of Dog Lake. And historically, this is quite an extraordinary geographic area in terms of the archaeological and cultural value of this place. There's so much with the regards to pictographs and also a canoe site, a birch bark canoe site. I think if we can move through, I don't know if there's other, but yeah. So Carpenter Island is an area on Dog Lake, and it's the only known historic canoe building site in Ontario, and that had birch bark canoe building. They believe that it's Ojibwe based on the spirit points and the pottery fragments that they found there, along with the evidence of the canoe building site. And also, so I mean, if we're looking at the value of the water from an economic sense, obviously the water held their main sources of economic trade being fishing and birch bark canoe building and pottery. So there would also be the clay sites were found along these rivers where the erosion taken place and exposed those areas to the people to have them to be able to access the clay for their pottery. And there is a 9,000-year-old spear point that was discovered on an ancient indigenous settlement in this area, Ohio Point. And in the 70s, they did a number of archaeological assessments of the area. And there's at least 3 or 4 different historic settlements, some Ojibwe, some Cree. So we also come to an understanding that it was a significant cultural gathering place in that regard. And then this map also depicts, and it's Thor Conway's book for archaeology in Northwestern Ontario that this is coming from. And he's calling them Indian cliff paintings, but I think we're better known now as pictograph areas. And so you'll see those areas that are grayed out or where there's a high concentration of pictographs. And these are all within significant watersheds and sort of that gathering confluence area between watersheds, which is interesting to denote. And a lot of the pictographs have to do with the intrinsic spiritual relationship that the peoples have with water. Next slide. This example of a birch bark canoe. So we're still reviving the building of birch bark canoes, and we are doing an annual birch bark canoe build so that the youth and the people can be revitalized to the trade and have that experience of both working with birch bark and then also launching them in the waters. So we're trying to do a real resettlement, rehoming for the people of Missanabie that were largely displaced out of the Dog Lake area, I should add, during 1920s with the establishment of the Chapleau Game Preserve. And we're still trying to bring the people back to this area to resettle. Currently, the reserve that was awarded in 2018 has only one person physically residing on it at this time, but we're starting to build the roads and build houses with the hope that we can have a resettlement of the community. Next slide. Nipi Manitowatuan. So it has a spirit power, and I think that's really important to understand when we're looking at the socioeconomic value of water, is that there's an understanding that there's more a sense of the power that the water holds, and especially with regards to Lake Superior being the largest of the Great Lakes. There are, can you go to the next slides, please? There's a number of things that exemplify this understanding of the power of the water and of sort of the esoteric spiritual relationship that the people have with the water. When they were in their canoes, they're pretty small compared to this gigantic water, and often they were, gifting the semi-gods to stay protected. And there was also the understanding of like negative and positive spirit forces, and that there's like the idea of serpents living in the water. It's sort of largely known across the Great Lakes, from Serpent River, Sagamok, all the way west to Gargantua and Pukassaw and to Thunder Bay, that there are the ideology, the ancient stories of serpents living in the water, in the caves, and that they have wreak havoc and negative influence on people. But there's also then the idea of semi-gods that are protective, such as the Thunderbirds and Missanabie. Missanabie is a semi-god figure that's considered to be a panther, a water panther, and whose horns, I should say, are made of copper. And the understanding amongst Indigenous people about copper is that copper cleanses the water and makes it, purifies it for the people. And there's a island, Mishpachatan Island, that's north of the map that you see here, that is supposed to be the home of Missanabie, and it's there that this creature, and some think it's of male force, others thinks it's female, some think it's an evil force, other thinks it's positive. And you'd have to read and have your sense of what your belief is in it. But to suffice it to say that there's historical understanding and also then pictographs and drawings and stories of these particular forces of spiritual energies, I guess is the way to describe it. And another is Nanabojo or Nanabojo, also a mythical, or not mythical, a semi-god figure considered to be at the center of the people, the creation of people, and the creation story, but also a mischievous character that would cause mischief in order to teach the people. And he or she is said to reside around Cape Gargantua, which is within Lake Superior Provincial Park. And Nanabojo's chair, which is now currently called Lake Superior Provincial Park, they call it the Devil's Chair, because the time of colonization, they really tried to make a negative spin on a lot of the story and the cultural traditions of the peoples in this area, by making it all seem like devil worship and witchery. But suffice to say that the Devil's Chair is considered to be Nanabojo's chair. And so I'm trying to give you a sense of, and maybe many of you already have an understanding or have read about these things, but that the people that have lived here and the history of the peoples that live here have their relationship to the water is much deeper than just the fishing and the economic trade and even the drinking of the water. It's esoteric in a sense that very difficult to understand, but that they would feel the draws and the powers of both positive and negative, and that they would worship and pray to the water, and that the water was considered very much at the heart and soul of their existence. So I'll just talk a little bit now about our partnership with NORDIK, and Dr. Tassone reached out to us in 2023 to help us to hire a water guardian into the department. And we were very excited about that idea. We always regularly were doing kind of prayer to the water and wanted to see the water be healthy and restore it. And this was a perfect opportunity where she had different partners and the funds available to help us undertake this kind of position to help keep the water healthy within the Lake Superior watershed. And so we hired on a water guardian, Ryan Wesley, who worked with us last year. And he learned how to do water sampling to test the pH and the oxygen levels of the water. And most still, from what we could gather from the data, things are really still in good form, and we can consider and be comfortable knowing that the waters are relatively healthy in terms of the amount of oxygen, and that the pH is not too acidic, and it's fairly healthy for the ecosystem. And we did testing at 5 different locations within the Dog Lake area, as well as the Hawk Lake. So the watershed that you've seen on the map, it goes down from Missanabie Lake to Manitowoc River and down into Hawk Lake. So we did testing at Hawk Lake, and then it flows out into Mishpacotton River, and we did testing at Mishpacotton River as well. Mishpacotton being the outflow into Lake Superior. So it was a really good, can you go back a slide? It was a really good experience for Ryan to learn about the Western science aspects of it, but we were also able to bring together two-eyed seeing. So there was the community outreach that he undertook as well with a youth camp to do tile art on what the water means to the members of Missanabie Cree. And I think that was a really fundamentally a good exercise in terms of rekindling the relationship with the water, and at that age group. We also overlapped our work with species at risk. So we had a species at risk fund, and we focused on freshwater species at risk to raise awareness and to teach about prevention. And we're going to continue to undertake that work, realizing that we have a number of invasive species in the Dog Lake, including the rusty crayfish and the zebra mussel. Okay, Miigwech, again, thank you. And I'll give it over now to Kiki, and I'm sorry I forget your name, but I think that they are taking the next part of the talk.
Yes, they are, although I'm going to preface it first. So thank you, Tess. And so we are doing a similar project to the one that Tess just talked about with community-based water monitoring in Sault Ste. Marie as well, that NORDIK Institute is also coordinating. So in a nutshell, we are using Water Ranger's Freshwater Explorer test kits, kind of similar to what Tess is using as well. Although we have slightly different needs and desires within our community, as every community is unique. So the program is coordinated through us, but it is partnered with the Sault Ste. Marie Region Conservation Authority, as monitoring is often in their purview. And so we're essentially bulking up their capacity as the second smallest conservation authority in Ontario. Their capacity is extremely limited. And our work is also supported by the City of Sault Ste. Marie in principle and in funding, as well as the Government of Ontario through the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. We have received funding, as Tess has mentioned as well. So our goal with this project is to essentially fill a data void that has existed here for many years, and to collect as much data as possible while also engaging with community members. So we are looking at trying to collect weekly monitoring data at 18 sites across the community from March to October. And we usually have about 20 active volunteers at any given time, sometimes more, sometimes less. You can imagine in March in Northern Ontario, we probably have less given the cold, but the summer months are pretty conducive to having a lot of fun when you're out on the water. So this is going to be the first time this much surface water data is available in our community publicly. People have generally not have had as much information available to them, even through the open data sources on the ministry portals. The data hasn't been able to be collected on a regular basis. So this is going to be the first time that this much information is available to everyone, both the ministry and our community members, which is awesome. The way that we are sharing our data is by uploading the information to the Water Rangers data portal, which then links into the Great Lakes data stream. So both of these portals essentially do the same thing. You can go on the website, you can get into the data for free without having any access permissions. And you can search sites, you can look at community groups. For example, you could look up our group and see all the sites that we do. And you can download data and compare it over time. If you use the Great Lakes data stream, they actually show you the Canadian Council of Ministers for the Environment guidelines, so the federal guidelines for certain environmental conditions, whether it's pH or oxygen or whatever the case may be. So you can see where our data points are and where the limits are for certain things. For example, young fish may not survive if the levels are below this line or something like that. So it gives you a reference point as well. So I will hand it over to Kiki and Ajaz to share some of their perspectives being part of this project now.
Thanks, Elaine. Hi, everyone. Sorry, the camera's broken. I wish you could see us. So hi, I'm Kiki. I am a water task team volunteer who turned to a full-time water ranger for NORDIK Institute. I assist in the coordination of Sault Ste. Marie Water Task Team and other water-related projects for Elaine and NORDIK. And through this community-based water monitoring project, I have gained real value and personal educational insights. Slide. So I've lived in the Yukon for the past 20 years on the confluence of the Yukon River on Marsh Lake, but I grew up in the waters of the Great Lakes, here, Lake Superior. Let's say I have an attraction to fresh water. So through this community-based water monitoring, I am gaining new insight into monitoring in populated areas versus remote or rural areas like the Yukon. Slide. This initiative has expanded my knowledge of water monitoring. This project in particular is my first experience ever working with a community-based water monitoring project or program. And what can I say about my first experience? We are getting things done. We have more people, more grounds we're able to get across because we have the resources, people being the resources. So we're acquiring more data. There's a saying, it takes a village. It's true. And one of my key takeaways educationally is for me working and learning from leaders in water protection who incorporate community, education, and Indigenous values into their projects. I'm from the Yukon, so coming down to Sault Ste. Marie, I'm really looking for a certain aspect of community. In occupational impacts, I would say developing and bringing awareness by building these community scientists is really unique and really intriguing to me. Ajaz?
Hello, everyone. My name is Adjust Shaikh. I completed my post-graduation in project management with a major business and economics from Algoma University. Recently, I joined NORDIK Institute as a project manager and a community coordinator, and I am privileged to be here today. Being involved in a community-based water monitoring project as a recent graduate from Algoma University can offer several benefits. During my academic life, I was in Professor Elaine's class, and she gave a general overview of our few projects, and this community-based water monitoring projects was one of them. That project sounded so interesting to me, and I am fortunate to say that now I am part of this project. Being part of this monitoring project feels like home to me. It provides a sense of belonging and fulfillment, as I am deeply connected to our mission and the community where we serve. The work we do resonates with my value and passion, making it more than just a project. It's a place where I truly feel I belong. I would say this is a great way to connect with the new communities and build relationship with neighbors. It provides an opportunity to contribute to the well-being of my community and helping them to ensure the safety and quality of the water resources. Participating in such projects can also enhance my understanding of environment, I would say, the whole issues and local governance structures, empowering me to advocate for positive changes. Slide, please. Finally, I would say it is a chance to learn new skills and it gains a valuable experience that can be beneficial both personally and professionally. On one hand, if I talk about the personal growth, engaging in community-based water monitoring project fosters a sense of belonging on purpose, which can contribute to improved mental well-being and stronger social support network. On the other hand, if I talk about the skill development, this project often involves training and data collection, analysis and reporting, participating, I can develop valuable technical and analytical skills that are transferable to other areas of my life and a career. Thank you very much. Slide, please.
Okay, so we go out with a lot of other community members. So we are volunteers right now. We actually have 29 other active volunteers. And some of the feedback that we've got from them is meaningful activities. So the Water Task team offers community members an opportunity to engage at any age, families, retirees, which this promotes positive well-being. You can see in the picture, this is retired Lillian, a current volunteer, otherwise known as my mother, who is 71 years old and is so keen right now to learn about the water in the area. She knows nothing about it, and now she has her eyes wide open. Healthy lifestyle, being active and connecting with like-minded nature lovers, water lovers. The cost, there is no cost. The cost is up to you. It could be gas, bus, depending on which of the 18 sites you want to monitor. Connecting with people for more comprehensible governance. So people are feeling included in knowing about water quality. They're contributing to data that could be used for decision-making bodies. It's providing a clear understanding to the community and members of our volunteer of water management and how to get involved with decision making. On to you, Ajaz.
I would say, if I talk about the knowledge sharing begins with educating community members about the importance of water monitoring. It is significant for public health, environmental conservation, and sustainable development. Actively participating in workshops, facilitating training sessions, and sharing informational materials disseminate knowledge about water quality parameters, monitoring techniques, and the potential impact of water pollutions. If I talk about engaging participation, the actively involving community members in the monitoring process foster a sense of ownership and responsibility. We can encourage their participation through the community meetings and collaborative planning sessions, creating a supportive and inclusive environment where all voices are heard, enhances engagement and commitment to this community-based water monitoring project. Slide, please. The knowledge sharing should be a two-way process where community members not only receive information, but also have the opportunity to share their insights, experience, and local knowledge. We have established a platform for dialogue, such as the community forums and discussion groups, where participants can exchange ideas, ask questions, and learn from each other's experience. I must say, I took this opportunity very optimistically, as I learned a lot from community members. If I talk about transparency and accountability, so it is essential for building a trust and credibility within the community. Ensure that information regarding monitoring results and data analysis are readily accessible to all the community members. The way Professor said, the Water Ranger website is an open source to access all those data. Foster a culture of accountability by encouraging open dialogue and feedback mechanisms for addressing those concerns. Lastly, I would say by prioritizing knowledge sharing within the community-based water monitoring project can empower community members, strengthen local capacity, and foster collective action toward ensuring clean and safe water sources for all. Thank you.
Okay, so in summary, what is the value of water? So if we were to encompass everything that was talked about today in a few short points, we could try. We obviously can't capture everything. That's the point of the hour. Social cohesion is one of those big things. What is the value of peace and productivity, right? How do you value that? Connection to self, family, and community, both identity and purpose. This is absolutely key for a variety of reasons. Ensuring culture, creative expression, and healthier lifestyles are supported. And so this is a value in the sense of providing wellness as well as knowledge sharing and being able to make decisions from that knowledge. Learning and professional development, which contributes to training and innovation in the region. Pathways for informed decision-making and community engaged, having a community engaged in management and stewardship means that we have potentially improved shared governance, which of course, when you have people engaged, increases transparency, which then also builds trust, partially because of that ownership piece that Ajaz was mentioning. Improve social environmental responsibility and healthy environments, in theory, means that you also have healthier people, which also in theory means that you are having to adapt or clean up issues later on less because you have either prevented or mitigated them already through this increased responsibility from the community members at large. So water connects all living things spiritually and physically. It builds cohesion in our communities and teaches us more about each other and ourselves. So to answer this question, what is the value of water? We can basically at this point only recognize that water is absolutely sacred. And the question is essentially akin to asking, what is the value of life? How do you put value on life, right? So I will refer to or defer to a 1997 advertising campaign to answer this question of what is the value of water? It is priceless. And for those of you who know this campaign, you will also know that for everything else, there's MasterCard. But in all seriousness, there is a reason I've brought this up. So unlike with this advertising campaign, there is no supplement for the resource we have when it comes to water, right? We can supplement our income with credit cards, but we can't supplement what we have with water. So it's absolutely important that we really take time to focus on addressing these questions the right way. So I will leave you with one last thought that we don't obviously have time to hash out now. This could be its own speaker series, but thinking about applying systems thinking to this question and how we understand and define our systems. There is a really big disconnect in terms of our decision making and our knowledge structures and how the world actually works. So when it comes to the decision making we do right now based on the approaches and methods that have been in place for many, many years, sometimes we make good decisions, sometimes we make bad decisions, and just like credit, we are going to have to pay for those decisions with interest later on. So let's try to make sure that we are doing this the right way to try and mitigate some of that impact for everyone later on. Thank you very much. And if you need to reach out to us, please feel free. And Roy also has our email addresses. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Elaine, Kiki, Ajaz, Tess. That was an amazing presentation. I don't think I could have asked for a more comprehensive overview of different perspectives on values in Canada than the presentation that you just gave. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your understandings of how to meaningfully engage people also in appreciating water, valuing water. We have 5 minutes left for questions. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A box. I don't see anything currently, so you have a little bit of time still, a minute or so to enter your question. While we wait for your question, I'll try to come up with a first question myself. I was wondering a little bit about the impacts of water rangers. I actually went quickly to the website while you were giving your presentation, and I see that this is an international platform or network. I did see that Saskatchewan and Lake Erie are mentioned as separate projects in there. Are you able to share with us maybe a little bit more information about this idea of community building and possibly even collective action in policy or decision making? Have you got any experience where through the engagement with local stakeholders, volunteers, you were actually able to influence decision making?
Yes, actually. I just put a link in the chat for everyone. That is to the Water Rangers impact page. They actually have participated in a number of reports with other organizations that do this work over the last few years to, I don't want to say quantify, but to demonstrate maybe the impacts of such initiatives. So they can, if you look at those reports, those can answer your question way better than I can right now in the next 30 seconds or a minute. But there definitely are implications, and I've seen partnerships with government agencies develop as a result of these community projects. I've seen improved relationships where there were relationships previously that maybe were not as effective. For us at NORDIK Institute, with this partnership with the Conservation Authority and the monitoring that we're supplementing for the province, we're not only learning a lot more ourselves and as community volunteers in terms of what kind of information is being used to assess things, to make decisions, and what goes into all of that. It's a very rigorous process, and a lot of community members don't necessarily recognize that initially, how much work goes into informing these decisions. So they've gotten a piece of that, but we also now have a chance to have those conversations directly with the ministry to say, hey, what about this? Hey, we've noticed that. Can we do this? And we're able to insert some of the community values in that way as well. And they're so far have been extremely receptive and open to it. And we've got a couple projects on the go to try and expand on that, but that's probably for another talk.
Yeah,
Tess, I don't know
sounds-
if you want to add anything. Sorry, Roy.
No, that's great. I don't have anything to add.
So thanks very much. So so they actually recognize also the monitoring data that you provide, because you were making the link with the CCME standards, which sounded very interesting. I was also interested to hear maybe a little bit more about what actually came out of your monitoring program. So because you have these different quality levels. I imagine that if it doesn't look that great, you have even more reason to reach out, but I can imagine that the acceptance of community-based or maybe even citizen science-based monitoring programs. I was wondering, how do they sit vis-a-vis the regular provincial water quality monitoring program, for example?
Mm-hmm. So that's a loaded question. So there's a couple of pieces to that I maybe will speak to just for the sake of time. One being what has come out of the program. So the Sault Ste. Marie program just started in March. So we're brand new. We don't have enough data yet to say we have conclusions yet. We're hoping at the end of this year to be able to share some of that with our community members, and maybe we'll come back next year to the series and share what we've learned. But about a year and a half ago, we did some work with Garden River First Nation, creating a community-based monitoring project there, and they were surprised to learn that, and this data is online, open data, so this is not confidential information that I'm sharing. They were surprised to learn that one of the streams, when we looked at the data trends and we looked at it on the data stream portal, we had no idea what the CCME, those federal guidelines were. And so when we saw the CCME line here saying this is the limit for some cold water species and young fish, and we saw our data point was way down there, we were like, oh, okay, so for dissolved oxygen, one of the streams, which happens to be downstream of a particular stressor that we were interested in, we showed low levels of oxygen that could have been hazardous to some of the species in the area. So they were now having other studies as a result of that they're looking into. Is this having an actual effect? Because every stream is different, right? And what is that effect? So we are learning things from these programs. Yeah, and I see that the time is almost up, so maybe I'll leave it there, Roy, unless there's something you want me to focus on specifically.
No, this sounds very interesting, and you're very happy to come back another time as well. I very much like the way you link the monitoring, the community-based monitoring, into the discussion about the values, and want to thank you and your colleagues once again for preparing this and making it so fit for purpose for the webinar series. I think we learned a lot today. Thank you so much. Elaine, thank you. Tess, thank you. Kiki, thank you. Ajaz. Good luck with the program. It sounds fantastic. It sounds really impressive. Thank you so much, and I will really seriously consider inviting you again when we continue with the program. I've come to an end. It's 1 minute to the hour. I just want to thank the audience online for participating. I didn't see any questions, so if you do have a question and I missed it, please email it to me. I can still share it with Elaine and her colleagues. If not, I look forward to welcoming you again to the next webinar, which is in about a month's time on June 12th, again at the same time, 12 noon Eastern time. And we'll have Dimple Roy, Director of Water Management at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, give a presentation then. Thank you all for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day. And once again, thank you so much, Elaine, Tess, Kiki, and Ajaz for sharing your experiences with us. Thank you. And thank you, Julie, for being there in the background as always.
Thank you, Roy and Julie.
Very nice to meet you.
Thank you.